The first time my mother said it out loud, it was said casually, like she was commenting on the weather. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same scratched oak table we'd eaten at my entire life, and I had just mentioned, very carefully, that I was thinking about applying for a job out of state. She didn't look shocked. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even look at me at first. She just sighed, stirred her coffee, and said, "You don't really have the right to do that, Anthony. Your brother needs you here." I'm Anthony. I was 27 at the time, old enough to have worked full-time for years, old enough to pay rent, cover my own health insurance, and have a resume that actually meant something. Apparently not old enough to decide where I was allowed to live. That sentence stuck with me. You don't really have the right. Not it would be hard for us. Not we'd miss you. It was framed like a moral failure, like even considering leaving was some kind of betrayal. And the worst part was how normal it sounded to her. Like she'd always understood my life as something that belonged to the family first, and only to me if there was anything left over. For context, I'm the older sibling. My brother, Marcus, is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, the roles were clear. I was the reliable one, the helper, the fixer. If something broke, I was expected to figure it out. If Marcus messed up, I was expected to smooth it over. My parents liked to joke that I was born 40. At the time, I took that as a compliment. Now I realize it was more of a warning. Marcus, on the other hand, was the project, the one who just needed more time, more patience, more chances. If he quit a job, it was because the boss didn't appreciate him. If he got fired, it was because the workplace was toxic. If he moved back home, for the third time, it was because family was supposed to support each other. And support, in our house, always flowed in one direction. By my mid-20s, I was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I had a decent job locally, but no growth, no future. Same faces, same ceiling. I'd watched former classmates move to bigger cities, build careers, lives that looked like forward motion instead of maintenance. I didn't want to disappear. I just wanted more. That didn't feel unreasonable to me. Apparently, it felt unforgivable to my family. After that first conversation, things shifted. Subtly at first. My mom would ask pointed questions when I came home from work. "You didn't talk to any recruiters today, did you?" She'd say it with a laugh, but her eyes were sharp. My dad would make comments about loyalty, about how people who chased money usually regretted it. Marcus would start dropping hints, how stressed he was, how hard things had been lately, how he didn't know what he'd do if I wasn't around. It was emotional gravity. Every time I tried to pull away, they pulled harder. I didn't stop applying. I just stopped talking about it. I sent out resumes late at night. I took phone screenings from my car so no one could overhear. Every small step forward felt like I was sneaking around, like I was doing something wrong instead of something necessary. That alone should have told me how unhealthy the dynamic was. But when you grow up inside something, it feels normal until you finally get some distance. The first real sign that things were worse than I thought came a month later, when an interviewer asked me an odd question. We were midway through a second-round call for a position I was excited about. Good company, good pay, in a city I dreamed of living in. Everything had been going smoothly until she paused and said, carefully, "I just want to clarify something that came up during our reference checks." My stomach dropped. She told me that someone who identified themselves as a close family contact had reached out to the company, not to provide a reference, just to express concern. They said I was emotionally unstable, that I had a habit of abandoning responsibilities, and that I was making a reckless decision by trying to relocate. She emphasized that they hadn't disqualified me outright, but they needed to proceed cautiously. I knew instantly who it was. When I confronted my mother that night, she didn't deny it. She didn't even apologize. She said, "I was just protecting you. And the family. You don't always think things through, Anthony." She said it gently, like she was explaining something obvious to a awareness child. My dad backed her up. Marcus sat there silently, staring at his phone. That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, quietly, like a hairline fracture spreading through glass. After that, the narrative changed. I wasn't just someone considering a move. I was pulling away, getting ideas, acting like I was better than everyone else. Extended family started calling me, asking if everything was okay, if I was going through something. Old friends would mention comments they'd heard, how I was planning to ditch everyone, how I'd forgotten where I came from. Every opportunity that stalled, every rejection email that came in, I wondered if it was bad timing or if someone had made another phone call. And still, I kept going. Because buried under the guilt and frustration was something solid. The knowledge that if I stayed, this would be my life forever. I'd be 40, then 50, still being told what I owed, still shrinking myself to make room for my brother's chaos. The breaking tension didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came the night I received an email that made my hands shake. An interview request. Senior level role. Out of state. A real shot. And as I stared at the screen, heart pounding, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. Your brother had another rough day, it read. He really needs you right now. Don't forget where your priorities should be. I sat there, alone in my car, reading those words over and over, realizing that no matter what I did next, something was about to change. I didn't respond to that message right away. I just sat there, engine off, phone glowing in the dark, rereading the sentence like it might change if I stared long enough. Don't forget where your priorities should be. Not are. Should be. As if they were something assigned to me, not chosen. As if my life came with a checklist I'd been failing to follow. That interview request should have felt like validation. Instead, it felt like I was holding contraband. Something dangerous. Something I had to hide. Over the next few weeks, the pressure ramped up in ways that were subtle enough to sound reasonable on the surface, but relentless underneath. My mom started calling me multiple times a day. Not emergencies, just checking in. If I didn't answer, she'd text things like, just making sure you're okay, or, you've been distant lately. There was always an undertone, like my silence was proof of wrongdoing. My dad began making offhand remarks whenever we were in the same room. People who leave usually regret it, he'd say, staring at the TV. Or, careers come and go. Family is forever. He never looked at me when he said it, which somehow made it worse. Like I wasn't even worth confronting directly anymore. Marcus leaned into it in his own way. He'd show up at my place unannounced, venting about how overwhelmed he was, how work was unfair, how life just kept piling on. He never outright asked me to stay, but every complaint was framed like a test. Like if I left, it would be proof that I didn't care. One night, after listening to him spiral for nearly an hour, I finally said, Marcus, you're an adult. You can handle this. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. That's easy for you to say, he snapped. You always think you're better than me. That was new. Or maybe it wasn't, and I'd just never heard it said out loud before. The interview process moved forward anyway. First round. Second round. A case presentation. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the job, but because of what I knew would happen if I got it. The family tension had reached a point where even small victories felt dangerous. Then came the first real sabotage that I could prove. I got an email from a recruiter I'd worked with before. Friendly tone, but cautious wording. She asked if everything was okay at home, because she'd received a call from someone claiming to be my mother. According to her, my mom had said I was under extreme emotional stress, that I was making impulsive decisions, and that any job requiring relocation would fall apart once reality hit. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I confronted my parents that same night. No tiptoeing. No careful phrasing. I asked them directly if they'd been contacting employers behind my back. My mom didn't even flinch. Of course we did, she said. Someone has to be responsible here. I asked her what she meant by that. You've been acting selfish, she replied. Running off chasing titles and money while your brother is barely holding things together. What kind of son does that? My dad nodded along, arms crossed. You're not thinking about the consequences. We are. I remember realizing, in that moment, that they genuinely believed they were justified. That this wasn't crossing a line in their minds. It was parenting. And that meant there was no limit. If they could call recruiters today, they could do worse tomorrow. The next few weeks were a blur of stress and second-guessing. I started losing sleep. Every unknown number that popped up on my phone made my stomach knot. Every delay from a company felt suspicious. I was living in constant anticipation of the next interference. Extended family started getting involved. An aunt called me to ask why I was trying to abandon everyone. A cousin messaged me saying my mom was really worried about my mental state. Someone had told them I was spiraling, that I was unstable, that I was being reckless. None of it was true, but it was effective. The emotional toll was relentless. I felt isolated, gaslit, and exhausted. There were moments I questioned myself. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe this was just how families worked, and I was the one refusing to accept it. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. The breaking point didn't come from another argument. It came from silence. One afternoon, I got a voicemail from a company I'd been deep in talks with. The message was polite but final. They decided to move forward with another candidate. No feedback. No explanation. An hour later, my mom called. "I heard you didn't get that job," she said, her voice soft, almost sympathetic. I froze. I hadn't told her. When I asked how she knew, there was a pause. Just long enough. "Well," she said, "I may have mentioned to them that you're not really free to relocate. That you're committed here." Something snapped. I don't remember everything I said after that, but I remember my voice shaking. I remember telling her she had no right. I remember her replying, "I absolutely do. You're part of this family." That night, I went through my email history. Slowly, methodically, I found patterns I hadn't wanted to see before, applications that stalled right after reference checks, recruiters who suddenly went cold, opportunities that evaporated without explanation. And then I found the email. It was buried in a forwarded thread from weeks earlier, accidentally sent to me instead of someone else. An internal message from my mother to a hiring manager, written like a concerned authority figure. She talked about my unreliability, my tendency to quit when things get hard, and ended it by saying, "I just couldn't live with myself if I didn't warn you." I sat there, staring at the screen, hands numb. This wasn't protection. It was control. The next day, Marcus came over again. This time, he didn't vent. He smirked, told me Mom said everything was handled, that I should relax and stop stressing about jobs that weren't meant to be. I realized then that this wasn't just my parents. He knew. He benefited. He'd been complicit the whole time. That was the moment something in me hardened. Not anger. Clarity. I stopped arguing. Stopped defending myself. Stopped explaining. I thanked them when they spoke. I nodded. I listened. I let them think they'd won. And quietly, without telling a single person in my family, I accepted the interview offer that came in 2 days later, the one they didn't know about yet. Because this time, I wasn't asking for permission, and I wasn't planning to warn them before everything changed. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be understood by them. That decision didn't come with relief. It came with a kind of quiet grief that settled in my chest and stayed there. Because once I stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped hoping they'd suddenly see me as my own person, I had to face what that meant. I had never actually been allowed to be one. The fallout was immediate, even though I didn't announce anything. I pulled back. I stopped answering every call. I responded to texts hours later instead of minutes. I said I was busy more often. That alone was enough to trigger alarm bells. My mom started leaving voicemails that sounded concerned on the surface, but sharp underneath. "I just don't recognize you lately," she'd say. "This isn't who you are." As if the version of me who wanted autonomy was some kind of malfunction. Marcus reacted differently. He grew colder, shorter. When we spoke, he sounded annoyed, like I'd failed some unspoken obligation. Once, he told me flat out, "You've changed. You used to be dependable." I didn't argue. I just thought about how being dependable had apparently meant sacrificing everything quietly and smiling while I did it. The interview I'd accepted, the one they didn't know about, was scheduled for early morning. Virtual. Camera on. I remember sitting in my car afterward, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, feeling like I'd just stepped off a ledge. I had no idea if it would work out. All I knew was that for the first time, the outcome wasn't being filtered through my family's approval. That should have felt empowering. Instead, everything collapsed. The next week was brutal. One by one, the remaining applications I'd had in progress fizzled out. Rejections came in polite, non-committal language. A recruiter I trusted told me, carefully, that my external references were raising concerns and that it might be best if I paused my search until things stabilized. Stabilized. As if my career were a weather system. My job performance slipped. I was distracted, exhausted, constantly bracing for the next hit. I started second-guessing everything. Every choice felt fragile. I wondered if I'd overplayed my hand, if I'd waited too long, if the damage was already done. Then came the call from my landlord. He told me, awkwardly, that he'd received a message from someone claiming to be my mother. She'd said I was planning to leave suddenly and might abandon responsibilities. She wanted to make sure he was protected. I hung up and sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the wall, staring at nothing. That was it. That was the moment I understood how far they were willing to go. This wasn't just about jobs anymore. It was about keeping me contained, making sure every exit was blocked. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, my boss pulled me aside. Nothing dramatic, just concern. He'd heard through community connections that I might be unstable, distracted, possibly planning a sudden move. He asked if everything was okay at home. I nodded, lied, said it was fine. That evening, I broke. Not in a cinematic way. No yelling. No tears in front of anyone. Just a quiet unraveling. I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, phone face down, and felt the weight of years settle all at once. Every time I'd chosen peace over honesty. Every time I'd swallowed resentment and called it maturity. Every time I told myself this was just how families were. I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't know who I was without them defining me. That was rock bottom. Not losing a job. Not getting sabotaged. Realizing that my sense of self had been built entirely around being useful to people who didn't see me as separate from their needs. The rebuild didn't start with confidence. It started with small, almost embarrassing steps. I stopped sharing information. Not just with my family, with everyone. I learned to sit with my own plans without narrating them. I deleted social media posts before publishing them. I stopped giving timelines. I stopped explaining motivations. I started treating my life like something private, not communal. I found a different recruiter. One out of state. Someone with no connection to my hometown. I used a new email address. A different phone number. I listed references who had never met my family. For the first time, my professional life existed in a vacuum they couldn't reach into. I also started therapy. Quietly. I didn't tell anyone. In those sessions, I said things out loud I'd never allowed myself to think. Like how I'd been trained to confuse guilt with love. How responsibility had been weaponized. How being the good son had cost me my own voice. Progress was slow. Some days, it felt non-existent. I'd get a promising lead, then spiral into fear that it would be taken away. I'd feel a flicker of hope and immediately brace for punishment. Conditioning like that doesn't vanish just because you recognize it. Money got tight. Stress piled up. There were nights I lay awake calculating worst-case scenarios, wondering if I should just give up, stay put, accept the role they'd written for me. And then, quietly, something shifted. I landed contract work. Nothing glamorous. Remote. Short-term. But it paid well enough to breathe again. More importantly, it was mine. No one had interfered. No one had approved it. It existed outside their orbit. That small win did something to me. It reminded me that competence didn't disappear just because someone tried to undermine it. That I still had skills, value, options. I built on it. Took another contract. Then another. Each one strengthened a muscle I hadn't used in years. The ability to trust myself. I started seeing patterns not just in their behavior, but in my own. How often I'd shrunk to avoid conflict. How quickly I doubted myself when challenged. Meanwhile, my family noticed the change. My mom started oscillating between concern and irritation. "You're very secretive lately," she said one afternoon. "Families don't keep secrets." I smiled and said I'd just been busy. Marcus complained that I wasn't around anymore, that he felt abandoned. I nodded and said I was focusing on work. They didn't know that every quiet boundary I set was deliberate, that every neutral response was practice, that every withheld detail was an act of self-preservation. By the time the offer finally came, the real one, the long-term one, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, steady, like I'd been preparing for this moment without realizing it. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Marcus. Not extended family. I signed the paperwork alone. I reread the relocation package 3 times. I checked the start date, the title, the salary. I sat with the reality of it until it felt real. And for the first time, instead of fear, I felt something else rise up. Resolve. Because I knew now that leaving wouldn't just be a move. It would be a line drawn. And once it was crossed, there would be no going back to the version of me they were used to controlling. I just hadn't decided yet how, or when, they'd find out. Once the decision was real, everything slowed down. Not outwardly. On the surface, life looked the same. Same apartment. Same routine. Same polite distance with my family. But internally, I was moving with intention for the first time. Every choice had weight. Every interaction had a purpose. The job offer came with relocation assistance, a start date 6 weeks out, and a title that meant something. Not flashy, but senior enough that it would raise eyebrows back home. I read the contract carefully, twice, then once more just to be sure there were no loopholes. No probation clause that could trap me. No language that could be twisted. When I finally signed, I felt grounded. Not excited. Grounded. Like I'd just locked in something solid beneath my feet. I didn't announce anything. That was part of the plan. I'd learned enough by then to understand that my family didn't react well to facts. They reacted to control slipping. The moment they sensed it, they'd escalate. So I let them believe the story they'd already written, that I was stalled, struggling, unsure, still orbiting their approval. My mom filled in the blanks herself. She told relatives I'd come to my senses, that I'd realized moving wasn't realistic, that I was finally prioritizing family. I heard all of this secondhand, through an aunt who assumed I already knew. I let it stand. Marcus got bolder. He started asking for help again, rides, favors, introductions. He spoke to me like I was back in my old role. "Since you're not going anywhere," he said one afternoon, "I figured you could help me with this." He didn't ask. He assumed. I noticed something then. How comfortable they were when they thought I was stuck. How generous they felt with my time, my energy, my future. I smiled. I nodded. I helped just enough to avoid suspicion. Behind the scenes, I was methodical. I secured my own documents. Birth certificate, social security card, anything that could mysteriously go missing. I changed passwords. Updated security questions with answers no one could guess. I rerouted mail. I quietly closed the bank account my mom had once had access to for emergencies, then opened a new one at a different institution entirely. I also started documenting things. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I saved emails. Took screenshots of messages. Wrote down dates and times of conversations where lines were crossed. Not because I planned to confront them with evidence, but because I needed to trust my own memory. Gaslighting works best when you doubt yourself. I wasn't going to give that any room. At work, I told my manager about the relocation quietly. Framed it as a positive step, a long-term commitment. She was supportive. Excited, even. She asked if my family was happy for me. I paused before answering. "They'll understand," I said. That wasn't a lie. Understanding doesn't require agreement. I also reached out to a few people from my past, former colleagues, mentors, people who had known me outside my family's narrative. I didn't vent. I didn't trauma dump. I just reconnected, asked how they were doing, shared what I'd been working on. Slowly, I rebuilt a network that existed independently of my last name. It felt strange, realizing how small my world had become without me noticing. The closer the move got, the more my family's behavior shifted. My mom started oscillating between warmth and suspicion. One day she'd cook my favorite meals, talk about future holidays, reminisce about when we were kids. The next, she'd ask probing questions. "You seem busy lately. You're not hiding anything from us, are you?" Her tone was light, but her eyes searched my face like she was waiting for something to crack. Marcus grew restless. He complained more. About money. About work. About how unfair life was. He'd sigh dramatically and say things like, "Some people don't realize how good they have it." He watched me closely when he said it. My dad stayed quieter than usual. Observant. I think, on some level, he sensed a shift he couldn't quite name. Then came the moment that clarified everything. We were at a family dinner. Nothing special. Just routine. Conversation drifted to careers, as it always did when relatives were around. Someone asked Marcus how things were going. He shrugged, complained about his boss. My mom jumped in to defend him, listing all the ways he was held back by circumstances beyond his control. Then she turned to me. "At least Anthony's staying local," she said, smiling tightly. "Some people chase illusions. He knows better now." I felt every eye on me. This was the moment they expected confirmation. Gratitude. Submission. The closing of the loop they thought they'd secured. I took a breath. Smiled politely. "I'm just taking things one step at a time," I said. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was enough to keep the peace. That night, after everyone left, my mom pulled me aside. Her voice was low, almost tender. "You've been distant," she said. "I hope you're not planning something that would hurt this family." There it was. The threat disguised as concern. I met her gaze. Calm. Neutral. "I would never hurt anyone," I said. Which was true. What I was planning wasn't harm. It was consequence. The final piece of the setup came together a week later, completely unplanned. A former co-worker reached out to congratulate me. Apparently, News of my new role had circulated in professional circles faster than I expected. He mentioned an article, an industry piece highlighting recent promotions and strategic hires. My name was included, not front and center, but enough that anyone searching would find it. I clicked the link and stared at the screen. There it was. My name, my title, the company, the city, public, verifiable, uncontrollable. I didn't share it, didn't post it, didn't mention it to anyone. I just saved the link, because I realized then that I wouldn't need to explain myself. I wouldn't need to argue or defend or justify anything. All I had to do was leave and let the truth arrive on its own. I packed slowly, thoughtfully. Each box felt like a boundary. Each item chosen was something I wanted to carry forward, not out of obligation, but intention. By the time moving day approached, my family still believed they were in control. They had no idea that the story they'd been telling about me was about to collapse under the weight of a single headline. I left before sunrise. No announcement, no goodbye breakfast, no dramatic confrontation. Just the quiet sound of my apartment door closing behind me and the hum of the highway as the city I'd outgrown disappeared in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light, like I'd finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. My phone stayed face down on the passenger seat for most of the drive. I already knew what would be waiting on it. Missed calls, messages, confusion turning into panic. But I didn't want to see any of that yet. I wanted my first moments in my new life to be mine. By the time I checked into the temporary housing the company had arranged, the article was already circulating more widely than I expected. Industry blogs had picked it up. A few professional contacts had reshared it. One of my former mentors sent a short message, "Proud of you. Well deserved." That one almost broke me. I didn't contact my family. I didn't block them either. I let the silence do the work. It took less than 12 hours. The first call came from my aunt. Breathless, confused. She asked why she was reading online that I'd taken a senior role across the country when my mother had told everyone I was settling down locally. I told her calmly that I'd accepted an opportunity I'd worked very hard for and that I'd relocated that morning. Nothing more. The second call was from my dad. He didn't yell. He asked where I was. I told him the city. There was a long pause. Then he said, quietly, "Your mother is very upset." I imagined her then, sitting at that same kitchen table, phone in hand, realizing that the version of reality she'd been managing had slipped out of her control in the most public way possible. I didn't respond immediately when she finally called. I let it ring, not to punish her, but to show that my time was no longer automatically hers. When I did answer, she didn't start with anger. She started with disbelief. "How could you do this without telling us?" she asked. Her voice shook, but not with sadness, with something closer to fear. "I told you," I replied evenly. I was taking things one step at a time. She accused me of blindsiding them, of humiliating the family, of making them look like liars. I let her talk, let the words spill out, because every accusation she made was really a confession. She was upset not because I'd left, but because she hadn't been able to stop me. Marcus texted next. Not congratulations, not questions, just, "So I guess you think you're better than us now." I stared at that message for a long time before replying. "I think I finally chose myself," I wrote. "You'll be okay." That was it. The fallout was messy, but it was contained, because I wasn't there to absorb it anymore. Extended family started reaching out, piecing together the truth. Stories my parents had told didn't line up with reality. People noticed, quietly at first, then more openly. Questions were asked. Why would someone sabotage their own son's career? Why had they been so adamant that I wasn't allowed to leave? The article kept spreading. It didn't just announce my promotion, it contradicted months of narrative. Every line of it was proof that I wasn't unstable, reckless, or disloyal. I was competent, trusted, chosen. My parents couldn't argue with a headline. The calls slowed. The messages softened. My mom left a voicemail a week later, tearful this time, saying she just wanted what was best for me and that she hoped I understood. I saved it. I didn't respond. Understanding doesn't require reconciliation. Marcus spiraled. I heard through the family that he'd told people I'd abandoned him, that I'd changed, that success had gone to my head. But without me there to prop him up, his complaints landed differently. People started asking him uncomfortable questions. What was he doing now? What were his plans? Why was everyone else responsible for his stability? He didn't like those questions. As for my parents, the control they'd relied on quietly evaporated. Without my presence, there was nothing to manage. No one to redirect blame onto. No convenient good son to hold up as proof of their virtue. They were left with the reality of their own choices, and the knowledge that those choices were now visible. Months passed. I settled into my new role, built a routine, made friends who knew me only as Anthony, not as someone's dependable backup plan. I walked into work every day without bracing myself for interference. I slept better. I laughed more. I caught myself making plans without checking how they might inconvenience anyone else. One evening, after a long but satisfying day, I reread the article that had started it all. It felt distant now, less like revenge and more like punctuation. A period at the end of a sentence that had gone on far too long. My mom eventually asked to talk. Properly. She said she wanted to clear the air. I agreed on my terms. We spoke over the phone. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I told her calmly that what she'd done had crossed a line and that I wouldn't allow that kind of control in my life again. That if we were going to have a relationship, it would be one built on respect and boundaries. She cried. She apologized, sort of. Enough to acknowledge harm, not enough to fully own it. And that was okay. Closure doesn't always look like confession. Sometimes it looks like distance that finally feels peaceful. Marcus never apologized. We don't speak much now. And honestly, that's fine too. The strangest part of all this is that I never raised my voice. I never exposed anyone publicly. I never sent screenshots or demanded accountability. I didn't need to. I let my life speak for me. I let consistency dismantle lies. I let success answer accusations. I let absence reveal how much of my role had been taken for granted. The article was never meant to be revenge, but it became my reply anyway. Because in the end, the most satisfying thing wasn't watching them scramble to explain themselves. It was realizing that I didn't need their permission to leave, and I never had.